truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, May 21st, 2024, the 1217th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. When you become a paid subscriber, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And in addition, you will get the ad-free experience, be able to join in the conversation on Substack, and join the interactive subscribers-only live streams every Wednesday. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, please continue listening to the show on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. So I want to start today by updating a couple of stories from last week, and I'm not talking about the Sky Magic Circle, even though the science let us know over the weekend that spacemen had discovered a new planet 1,200 light years away that they say is light and fluffy like cotton candy. They call it a fluffy Jupiter. Apparently, they believe that you will believe that they've actually discovered that. But for real, that is not one of these stories that I intend to update from last week. Let's get started here in Politico. Senate Democrats split on next steps after Alito flag flap. So they need to figure out what to do about Samuel Alito's wife hanging an American flag upside down 3.5 years ago. Because they just found out about it, which means now it's a big deal. And of course, the pictures must have been taken 3.5 years ago for any of this to be real. And no one's denying that it's real, by the way. A neighbor down the street had put up an anti-Trump sign, and Mrs. Alito hung the flag upside down to communicate a nation in distress in response to that. The New York Times, who has had these 3.5-year-old pictures for some amount of time that is unknown to all of us, ran a major story about it last week in an attempt to delegitimize Alito's position on the Supreme Court. They say that's in relation to the Donald Trump immunity case. I suggested last week that it could have to do with Chevron deference. And there's also the matter of so many J6ers being charged under false pretenses, potentially unconstitutionally. But Democrat senators have taken it upon themselves to figure out what to do about a news story that was released last week about something that happened 3.5 years ago. Senate Democrats, according to Politico, are united in condemning the upside-down U.S. flag flown at Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's home. They're split, though, on where to go from there. Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin, who could greatly influence those next steps by Democrats, said his panel wasn't prepared to hold a hearing on the matter after the justice told the New York Times his wife briefly flew the flag amid a dispute with neighbors without his knowledge. But Durbin and his Democrat colleagues were unequivocal that the episode, involving a symbol used by supporters of former President Donald Trump in making false claims about the 2020 election won by President Joe Biden, underscored the need for Supreme Court ethics reform and the need for Alito to recuse himself. You got to love the lengths they go to make sure to repeat all of the slogans within the central narrative. Former President Donald Trump, President Joe Biden, who won the 2020 election. If you have to spend 3.5 years saying that the guy you always call president really did win his election, it's pretty clear to everybody that he didn't win his election. Trump and all of his supporters probably could have just taken the last 3.5 years off and everybody would have eventually figured it out just based on how insecure the media always sounds. But Senate Democrats want everyone to know that this illustrates the need for ethics reform at the Supreme Court. I don't think there's much to be gained with a hearing at this point. Durbin, the chamber's number 2 Democrat, said Monday, I think he should recuse himself from cases involving Trump and his administration. And there you have it. It's the same strategy they're pursuing with these trials. Let's make all the claims and then make sure that people don't really get the details of any of these trials because it doesn't work out so well when they do. Dick Durbin, why would he want to have a hearing? It's better for the New York Times to run an article, have MSNBC and CNN and random podcasts get all up in a lather about an upside-down flag flown by Alito's wife 3.5 years ago, and then use the shame campaign and street protesters to get Alito to recuse. And yes, coincidentally, there were leftist protesters at the Alito's house the weekend before the New York Times ran that story. They were just mad about the Dobbs decision from 2 years ago, or so we are told. Not all Democrats feel that way about a hearing, though. Senator Alex Padilla, who was appointed by Gavin Newsom to fill Kamala Harris's empty seat. He then, quote unquote, won a fake election in 2022. California's other senator, this is why I mention it, well, she's also appointed. That's LaFonza Butler. So both of California's senators were appointed by California's governor, who won a rigged election to avoid a recall. What an absolute mess California is. But Padilla doesn't believe that Samuel Alito could have possibly missed the fact that his wife had turned the flag upside down. And that's the real critical point that needs investigation. That's what makes it so that Samuel Alito must recuse himself. There's no way he was unaware, Padilla said, referring to Alito's statement to the New York Times that the flag was briefly displayed by his wife without knowledge. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a senior member of the panel, agreed in a statement to Politico. Supplying strange excuses to Fox News is not a substitute for a real investigation into whether Justice Alito needs to recuse from insurrection cases. So first off, January 6th was not an insurrection. There's no way to honestly describe it as anything close to that, at least if you're referring to Donald Trump and or his supporters. People who knowingly certified fraudulent electors as the products of fraudulently certified elections. I suppose you could classify that as an insurrection, but the insurrection happened prior to that. Donald Trump often says the insurrection happened on November 3rd, 2020, and people just pretend that he is saying that euphemistically somehow. Kind of like when he said he was a wartime president. Oh, yes, that was also euphemistic. And when he said we have it all, euphemism. When he said if we're right about the fraud, Joe Biden can't be president, that was just a euphemism. Like when he said they spied on my campaign. Euphemism. When he said we caught them all, euphemism. Trump was just joking the whole time. And in minds of Biden voters, that's really what things look like. They don't take Trump seriously. They were told not to by the television for years on end, and so they just never do. They pretend that he didn't actually have the authority of his office, like he wasn't commander-in-chief of the military, like he had no idea what he's doing, and they all think he's dumb. Still, somehow they all think he's dumb. But okay, commies, have fun while you can. Keep on going with this whole thing about Donald Trump and the insurrection. White House said the episode underscored the need to pass his legislation overhauling ethics and transparency requirements for the Supreme Court, which passed the committee in July 2023 on a party line vote, despite fierce GOP opposition. I'm sure it was very, very fierce. A group of 45 House Democrats also urged Alito to recuse himself from all January 6th and 2020 election-related cases in a Tuesday letter led by Representative Hank Johnson, the man who thought Guam was going to tip over. One point of Democrat agreement, Alito's explanation for the flag flap was unconvincing. And then Politico quotes various Democrats agreeing that Alito must have known, and they think it's very underhanded. It's just so low to blame your wife. So what do we have here? We have a regime prosecuting a quote-unquote former president for the first time in American history. They are intending for the courts to declare Donald Trump a felon and criminal and throw him in prison for like 700 years. For things that he did while executing the duties of his office. And the Supreme Court needs to decide whether or not that is acceptable under our quote-unquote constitutional system. And a political party full of totally legitimate elected representatives, congressmen, senators, they want to invalidate a Supreme Court justice's ability to sit for this case and any other case they deem to be similar to this case because of their opinion that Alito must have known his wife turned the flag upside down and therefore he's lying, which just makes him more guilty. Now, maybe I'm the stupid one, but it sounds to me like they are destroying faith in our institutions. We talked last week about how former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan won his fake primary last Tuesday night, making him the GOP nominee for Senate to be decided in a rigged Maryland election this fall that we will be told was free and fair because the J6 actor Harry Dunn lost his primary while the super-based and red-pilled Kimberly Klacik won hers. The regime intends for Larry Hogan to win his Senate seat, probably as his reward for going along with the entirety of the COVID program, and we will be told that Republicans have done the impossible, winning a Senate seat in deep blue Maryland. Republican voters and many Trump supporters will be happy about this. They will applaud the entire way, not realizing that the Uniparty's best case scenario is to install Uniparty members up and down the ballot prepared to subvert Donald Trump's presidency and thwart his agenda throughout his next term, while convincing Republicans and Trump supporters that the elections are free and fair, safe and secure, and that the reported result accurately reflects the will and intent of the voters, when obviously nothing has changed. We talked about how this Larry Hogan race would be made a national issue, and the parties hoped to do that. Larry Hogan represents an anti-Trump moderate with a little R next to his name. He is a uniparty dream. He is a Democrat that they can reliably pitch as a Republican, and people will believe it because they think, oh joy, what incredible news it would be to win a Republican Senate seat in Maryland, as if winning a rigged election is even a salient concept. This is what the DeSantis simps used to pitch about Ron. Well, sure, Donald Trump hasn't fixed the elections, therefore we need someone who can win a rigged election and then go into office and unrig those elections. They will claim Larry Hogan is a unifier. He is the sort of politician that we need in the future. And Larry Hogan's presidential run for 2028 will begin almost immediately after he is installed in office, very much like Glenn Youngkin before him. But here is Politico helping Larry Hogan kick off his campaign. Larry Hogan launches first Maryland Senate general election ad focused on abortion. This is from today. So the news outlet, news in quotes, is helping the uniparty right Senate candidate in deep blue Maryland disseminate a political ad. Are they reporting on a real important controversy about the political ad, or are they just disseminating it for the uniparty right? It's obviously the second one. Larry Hogan is essentially a Democrat. They are pitching Larry Hogan to Democrats and quote unquote centrists, people who believe that they are moderate Republicans, neocons, etc., as the ideal model of the alternative to what the uniparty left offers. So I'll play Larry Hogan's ad and then we will go through Politico's analysis of this.
I'm Larry Hogan. As governor, I promised to uphold Maryland law on abortion while providing over-the-counter birth control covered by insurance, and I kept my word. Today, with Roe overturned, many have asked what I'll do in the United States Senate. I'll support legislation that makes Roe the law of the land in every state, so every woman can make her own choice. I'm Larry Hogan, and I approve this message because no one should come between a woman and her doctor.
Larry Hogan, pro-abortion, Republican. Did it say Republican in that ad? Nope. Conservative? Nope. Just Larry Hogan, because I believe in a woman's right to choose. Larry Hogan, because nobody should come between a woman and her doctor. And that also counts if the doctor is just a clinician at an abortion provider, and the woman is any one of tens of thousands of women who are being encouraged to get abortions after coming to this country as part of the global regime's slave trade. Who knows how many were sexually assaulted on the journey? The reported numbers vary, but it's often between 40 and 75%. Of course, there is also a market for aborted fetal tissue, particularly in the fields of medical research and vaccine development. So whose agenda is that? The pharma companies? Oh, the same people who profited so greatly off the COVID-19 very deadly pandemic program that Larry Hogan dutifully implemented in Maryland, that deep blue state. Here's what Politico has to say. Larry Hogan is taking to the airwaves in his latest attempt to neutralize Democratic attacks on his abortion rights record. But he doesn't actually need to do that. We will be told that abortion is the key issue this fall because the Uniparty is trying to make this campaign about a national abortion ban that isn't even possible, much less supported by Donald Trump. Donald Trump has come out many times against that, saying it's an issue for the states, as it should have always been, and as the courts just decided in that Dobbs decision that has them so upset at Samuel Alito. The former Maryland governor had declined to fully elaborate where he stood on the issue during his state's Senate GOP primary. And in the week since Hogan won his party's Senate primary, he's repeatedly sought to clarify his stance, directly addressing abortion in his first major speech as the nominee, in interviews, and now on TV. Why is Politico telling us any of this? Larry Hogan's campaign is not a national issue. Larry Hogan winning a rigged election in Maryland will not be proof of the Uniparty right's popularity, power, or legitimacy. They are trying to create this out of nothing. This is actually more pathetic than Nikki Haley's presidential campaign, and that might have been completely fake. I mean, truth be told, this might be completely fake too, but seems less likely. Then again, all these Uniparty members are the same. Slightly different versions of the same thing, slightly different brand representation, but they're all serving the same cause in roughly the same way. Hogan's first general election ad is set to air Wednesday, and it's entirely about abortion. In it, the former governor goes direct to camera as he endorses codifying the abortion protections the nation had under Roe v. Wade. Again, that's impossible. That is just as impossible as a nationwide abortion ban. It's not happening in either direction. With Roe overturned, many have asked what I'll do in the United States Senate, he says in the ad. I'll support legislation that makes Roe the law of the land in every state so every woman can make her own choice. Now, if they're able to successfully sell anyone on this reversal, it'll then be Donald Trump's responsibility to sign that into law. And you can expect to hear this framing over the course of the next month as we lead into that first Trump-Biden debate at the end of June. You can almost hear the question, Mr. Trump, if you become president and a bill is sent to your desk that makes Roe the law of the land, will you sign it? All of a sudden, you get to put abortion back on Donald Trump and back on MAGA. Now, again, I don't think any of this is going to work. I'm just saying I believe this to be the strategy, and we'll see. We will have an answer to whether or not I'm right over the course of the next 5 weeks. Might not even take that long. The 30-second spot, shared first with Politico, oh, how lucky they are, is part of a more than $1 million buy and will air on cable, broadcast, and digital platforms in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. media markets. And you have to wonder if Politico got paid to run this article disseminating Larry Hogan's ad for him. They write, it's the latest move in a bid by Hogan to defang abortion rights-centered attacks that Democrats have wielded against Republicans since the fall of Roe. And of course, this accepts the official story within the central narrative that abortion has won multiple elections and has been passed by voters in ballot measures in red states. All of that a result of rigged elections. We have to pretend that the rigged elections are not rigged and that voters across America are telling their representatives that they are pro-abortion. Does anyone believe this? Anyone who has had their lives affected in the last 4 years by the state, the quality of our government, and the degradation of our culture probably is not prioritizing abortion as their biggest issue. Now, I understand it's a deal breaker for a great many Christians and conservatives, and I get it, good for you. But that's a bare minimum bar to cross. You're not going to vote for a pro-choice candidate no matter what. That's not going to be the thing that makes your decision one way or another. anyone who has realized what the uniparty is and what Joe Biden is and what the agenda is. They want all of that gone. They're not going to forget all of that in favor of some mythic national law about abortion. There's a strong likelihood that even if Larry Hogan somehow gets shoehorned into the Senate, he will never in his Senate career, illegitimate though it may be, see a bill about a national abortion ban or a bill to create abortion rights nationwide. No one is going to be tricked into voting on this ridiculous mythology. Hogan will face Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, who won a contentious Democrat primary. Alsobrooks and her allies have already begun attacking Hogan's record on abortion, pointing toward his gubernatorial veto of a law that would have expanded access to the procedure in the state. Actually, he vetoed a law that planned to use $3.5 million to set up an abortion care training facility. He's obviously extremely pro-choice. They probably sent that law to him for him to veto to provide him with some semblance of Republican street cred and nothing more. Politico's not even honestly describing that, claiming that the bill would have expanded access to the procedure. Their goal, according to Politico, is to nationalize the race, reminding voters that Hogan would caucus with the GOP and vote to confirm judges who could determine the future of abortion. The future of abortion has already been determined by the judges. Now, of course, they're going to try to pass these laws in various states and then have those laws challenged, get a more favorable Supreme Court, and then overturn the Dobbs decision that overturned the Roe versus Wade decision. And then they will have a quote unquote constitutional right to abortion, even though that was never a real thing. They don't want to have this argument in states with representatives who can be held accountable in real elections. They can't have abortion anywhere under those conditions. And people should understand that. If their positions were popular, it wouldn't be this hard to make them laws. And they're this way about everything. Their entire agenda is unpopular. They wouldn't require the censorship and the propaganda if it was. And they certainly wouldn't require stolen elections. Hogan faces the daunting task of winning the Senate seat while sharing a ballot with former President Donald Trump, in a state the former president lost handily in 2020 and is expected to lose again this year. I guess we'll see. To do so, Hogan will have to both distinguish himself from Trump and appeal to Maryland's more liberal-leaning electorate. Well, no, he'll just need the election fraud apparatus to remain in place. Democrats have already excoriated him for what they describe as political expediency. In a video last week, Alsobrooks' campaign cut tape of Hogan saying he would caucus with Republicans in the Senate and of him dodging questions on federal abortion policy. Oh, wow. A Republican senator is going to caucus with Republicans? And the article goes on to make it clear that Larry Hogan is extremely pro-choice, but that if you are a radical feminist and a proponent of big pharma and the abortion industry, you just can't trust him as much as someone with a D next to her name. You're going to get 5.5 months of them attempting to make this a national issue and to raise Larry Hogan's profile. They want to turn Larry Hogan into a national figure, someone they believe they can successfully present as a middle ground sort of candidate, a unifier, someone who is in opposition to Trump, but also knows that Joe Biden has gone just a little too far, and he's got an R next to his name. That R stands for responsible. Larry Hogan, he's the responsible choice. Blah, 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 tax policy. Blah, blah, pro-choice. Blah, 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 Ukraine and Israel. I'm Larry Hogan. I'll say mean things about Donald Trump when the TV tells you he's saying mean things about you. And I won't do that thing you don't like, whatever that is. What will I do? Only things that I can describe as things that Donald Trump and Joe Biden wouldn't do. Larry Hogan, because they promised I could have this when I told you to wear 2 masks. All right, so those are the follow-ups for Thursday and Friday. Now let's follow up to yesterday. We were talking about how Donald Trump, in his speech before the NRA on Saturday, asked, if I'm not mistaken, Representative Ronnie Jackson of Texas whether it would be Trump's second term or third term when he wins. He talked about how FDR had served nearly 4 terms, and so something like that wouldn't be unprecedented. Now, the media has reacted, as I discussed yesterday, in confusion, although maybe they are just feigning confusion. They're pretending Donald Trump said something other than he said. They are always allowed to reframe his words. Donald Trump, the way he said it, euphemism. He couldn't have possibly meant that he is president in some sense now, despite leaving office as a wartime president who had declared an insurrection and said the guy who stole the election couldn't be president. That's definitely not Trump's position. That's not what he's suggesting here in his comments. He's saying he might run for another term in 2028. He's going to take time during his next term to repeal the 22nd Amendment, and just that one. And then he's going to run again in 2028. That's what we're expected to believe by the mainstream media. Well, Joshua Green wrote an article for Bloomberg today called "A Hidden Variable in the Presidential Race, Fears of Trump Forever." And Trump forever, or forever Trump, would be the opposite of never Trump. Never Trumpers are willing to destroy the entire country forever to make sure that Donald Trump can't be president. And the opposite of that is that Trump should be president until he dies, and we'll just have to see what happens after that. Well, Joshua Green, the writer of this article for Bloomberg, was on War Room this morning. And here is a couple minutes of that. If you want to hear the extended clip, you can easily find it on the War Room channel on Rumble or in the information stream on Telegram, t.me/very reasonable.
What is President Trump saying that you picked up on and did a deep dive on?
So my piece is called Trump Forever with a question mark. And it's based on, I get to sit in on kind of focus groups and stuff from time to time. Strategists in both parties will let me do this just to kind of get a pulse of what voters are talking about and worrying about. And one thing that I picked up on was that a lot of undecided voters and a lot of voters who actually voted for Biden in 2020 but then have turned against him are hesitant to vote for Donald Trump because they're afraid that if Trump is reelected, he'll never leave the White House, that he'll wipe out term limits, declare himself king, and essentially establish a permanent presidency. And this is a real fear among real people who are out there.
This is because you think the media has played. By the way, let's play the clip from President, because President Trump does do this now just about every rally. Let's go ahead and play it.
You know, FDR, 16 years, almost 16 years. He was 4-term. I don't know. Are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? You tell me. Ronnie, what do you think? Are we 3-term or 2-term if we win?
3-term or 2-term, and then the audience always goes 3. The vote is
look. This isn't a media fabrication. You know this. Trump likes to talk about this stuff. Number one,
But as I think
he said, "I'll be a dictator for a day." Sean Hannity invites him on to knock it down, and he goes, "No, I meant it. I'm serious."
No, but hold it. But my point is, you have a very wise individual quoted in this story that says to do that would take 2/3 of the House and the Senate. It's a whole process. It's not going to happen. He does this. This is what I love about him. Okay, first off, half of this audience would say, "Hey, I'm good. How do we make this happen?" Right? Of course, MAGA would say, "Of course, how you do it?" He's clearly trying to trigger people. But you're saying when you actually sit in these focus groups, there are some independent voters who might vote for Trump who actually get triggered by this.
That's correct. So the group of voters I'm looking at and writing about are not Rachel Maddow liberals who think Trump's gonna whatever. Those people are already convinced he'll declare himself king. And it's not MAGA people who are thinking, hey, that'd be great if he did it. These are undecided, mostly battleground state voters who don't really like either candidate. They're mad about Biden over inflation, or they think he's too old or whatever, but they are hesitating and getting behind Trump, or deciding they won't get behind Trump because they're worried. They hear the stuff. They see some of the January 6th stuff. They see Trump's comment about I'll be dictator for a day. They hear Trump at the NRA rally saying 3 terms, and they think, well, I don't love Biden, but I don't want this guy to be president forever.
Okay, so Joshua Green is a writer for Bloomberg. He is the author of a book that he released in January of this year called The Rebels. On the cover are AOC, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders. And the subtitle of the book is Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the Struggle for a New American Politics. His Twitter profile links to his account on Blue Sky, which is the app started by Jack Dorsey that Dorsey recently left. It was supposed to be a model for decentralized social media. That was the one that I talked about back in January. I had joined that. I posted for about 2 days before I was banned from the site. It is the most degenerate, liberal, normie app I have ever been on. It was unbelievable. But Joshua Green fits right in there. So he is invited by the political parties, the Uniparty right and the Uniparty left, to focus groups. And in those focus groups, they show this very serious journalist what the real voters of America actually care about. This is the authority on which he claims to know what the voters of America are interested in. You just heard him tell that to Steve Bannon. He is suggesting that there is this group of independents there who still believe everything on television. That's why they're mad at Donald Trump. The very violent insurrection, the court cases, and the claim that he is going to be president forever. That is what they're worried about. That's what's making them so hesitant. This is very much like the nationalization of the abortion issue. They are attempting to create narratives that they can then pitch as dominating the national political conversation. So they don't have to talk about the funding of fake foreign proxy wars or immigration or global governance or the rise of BRICS and the collapse of the dollar as the reserve currency or stolen elections or any of the rest of it. It's going to be abortion, Donald Trump saying he was going to be a dictator for a day, and Donald Trump being president forever. They expect all of this to hold for another 5.5 months somehow. Let's get to the piece. As the rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump draws nearer, political professionals are detecting an unusual concern among some undecided voters that if Trump returns to the White House, he'll refuse to step down when his term is up. They said this in 2020, throughout 2020. Bill Maher started saying it before 2020. And Bill Maher was out there on Greg Gutfeld's show, of all places, last night saying the same thing. And by the way, we didn't have a legitimate election in 2020. Trump never conceded, and Joe Biden will clearly never be a real president. So I would be totally fine with them saying that if they had any of that context. But they don't. It's all about Trump's ego and his desire to cling to power. He wants to make himself a king and rule forever. That's what we're told by these people. It's not like they're saying we understand the theory of devolution and believe it to be in play. There's no nuance to what they're suggesting. They're just pretending that Trump really wants to be a dictator forever. C.G. Carpenter, vice president at David Binder Research, noticed this fear in early April while conducting focus groups of people who had voted for Biden in 2020, but became disillusioned and were considering switching sides. We were talking to Latino men and Asian American Pacific Islander women in battleground states, Carpenter recalls, and they went straight to the issue of, what if Trump won't give up power? So basically, people are concerned about the thing the TV and newspapers told them to be concerned about, and all the media had to do to convince them was show them some comments that Trump made at a speech that they took out of context before intentionally distorting the meaning of the actual words.
I don't know. Are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? You tell me. Ronnie, what do you think? Are we 3-term or 2-term if we win?
Are we considered 3-term or 2-term if we win? Carpenter has a decade of experience running focus groups for Democrats, but he'd never encountered this fear in earlier cycles. It's not something we'd been testing for, he says, but what we've seen so far indicates a real concern there. Republican strategists have encountered the same thing. It's showing up in our focus groups, says Sarah Longwell, the chief executive officer of Longwell Partners and publisher of the conservative website The Bulwark. It just happened the other day. Okay, so the Bulwark is a liberal outlet. It's not a conservative outlet. It is a never Trump outlet where they express full support of the Uniparty in everything it does. Remember the guy with the puka shell necklace on Showtime's The Circus, Tim Miller? He writes for the Bulwark. The main story on their front page today: can Nikki Haley do the right thing? How she treats Trump could decide the election. Oh, sure. In the top left corner of the site, bashing Biden on bombs, congressional GOP wants a blank check for Israel. And of course, it's got an Israeli flag right behind Joe Biden's head, sandwiched between two American flags. Bottom right, Alito's Monty Hall problem about the upside down flags. This is a conservative outlet. These are people Joshua Green of Bloomberg and Blue Sky believes to be serious conservatives. He's not saying this ironically. He's not saying this to give them cover. He believes that MAGA is the anomaly. These people claim the Uniparty is a conspiracy theory. That's where these people are coming from. Longwell shared a video of a group of undecided swing state voters who had been asked if they were worried that Trump might violate the constitutional amendment limiting him to one more term if he wins in November. Does anybody think he may not abide by the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution and leave office after the 2028 election? Anyone worried about that? The Monitor asked. In response, 7 of the 8 participants raised a hand. A Pennsylvania man worried that Trump might go further and try to institute a dynasty. I wouldn't put it past him now that he owns the RNC, the man said. To say Don Jr. is going to do the next term and he'll get 2, and then Barron will get 2, and we'll just have some fake monarchy. Now, I don't mean to insult my fellow American, but that is utterly retarded. We currently have an illegitimate government run by exclusively Manchurian candidates, the so-called leader of which is a demented old pervert who's one of the most corrupt politicians in American history and was mentored for decades by a Klan leader. Also, what is a real monarchy? Does he mean the British royals? Those are also Manchurian candidates. They're just puppets of the City of London, the actual crown, the thing called the crown. It's not the British royals. It's the City of London, the bankers. It has always been that way. Green writes, as far-fetched as it may sound, the prospect of Trump overriding or simply ignoring the constitutional provision that limits a president to serving 2 terms seems to be pushing some undecided voters toward Biden, despite significant reservations about the incumbent's age, turmoil in the Middle East, and high inflation. Now, strategists in both parties are probing to see how widely this sentiment has spread, particularly among the undecided voters likely to sway the election. By the way, for what it's worth, the Bulwark has plenty of entries featuring Larry Hogan, including a podcast with former RNC chair Michael Steele, who is now just an MSNBC analyst, that calls Larry Hogan the most Democratic Republican. Back in 2022, the Bulwark featured an article by Jim Swift with the headline, Maryland GOP throws it all away. The subheadline, Republicans turned their backs on their popular 2-term governor, Larry Hogan, by elevating a crank over his chosen moderate successor. That's how never Trump these people are. And we are told these are Republicans, these are conservatives. They're hosting focus groups and then telling reporters about them, not to promote their agendas and their narratives, but to give reporters an idea of what the voters across America really think. At some point, we have to understand that the focus groups and the polls reflect how well the television is doing at convincing people to believe it. And isn't it interesting that Joshua Green framed this as something that voters were proactively concerned about. This is what they would report to the focus groups. This is one of my biggest concerns. Man, I just can't stop thinking about how if I empower Trump, then he's going to turn into a forever president. Actually, he's going to turn into a fake monarch. He's just going to get rid of the office of the presidency against the will of the American people, and then he'll just be king forever until he hands it off to his son and his grandson or his other son or whoever. Normal Americans are not sitting around freaking out about that any more than they're freaking out about abortion as a national issue when it's already a state issue. But Green isn't disseminating this propaganda, this ridiculous false framing of what Trump clearly said and clearly meant, and the focus group run by the company of one of the editors of The Bulwark, that's not to generate the necessary narrative lines that they want to push about Trump as dictator, Trump as forever president, Trump as king who will never give up power. These are just real Americans coming to political propaganda professionals and letting them know that they absolutely agree with the television. They're from both sides. They're very real. This is our hard evidence that voters across America care about what we say they care about and not what that other guy says they care about. I mean, sure, he has 80,000 people in front of him screaming in agreement the entire time, but we found 8 child-brained uniparty supporters in Topeka, and they seem a lot more responsible than a bunch of MAGA extremists at a Trump rally. Trump's own provocations appear to be driving the fear of a permanent presidency. One obvious example is the riot on Capitol Hill on January 6, 2021, when Trump supporters, with his encouragement, tried to halt the certification of the 2020 presidential election to keep him in power. Later on, in a 2022 social media post, Trump called to terminate parts of the Constitution in response to the election fraud he falsely asserted had taken place in 2020. Last December, Fox News host Sean Hannity invited the former president to tamp down voter concerns about Trump's use of authoritarian rhetoric. Instead, Trump insisted he would be a dictator only on day one of his presidency. In a recent Time interview, he said that comment was made in jest, although he added, "I think a lot of people like it." And so, of course, that means that Trump was actually serious. He wasn't trying to drive these people insane and make them all make themselves look like fools. He's lying when he says he's joking, because everybody knows that what he wants is to hold on to power forever, and that all that stuff he says about giving the country back to the people, that's all a lie. Just like when he lied about the 2020 election, because Joe Biden really did get 81 million real lawful American votes. No one's ever seen any evidence of it. But if it wasn't true, the TV surely would have told us. And they didn't tell Joshua Green, so I guess he just knows that Trump lies a lot. You could never fool Joshua Green of Bloomberg and Blue Sky. He heard this directly from 8 child-brained uniparty supporters in Eastern Virginia. Or, well, not directly. The editor of The Bulwark, who constantly pushes these sorts of things, the 8 uniparty supporters told her friend that, and she told Joshua Green that, or at least she shared a video with him, and that is direct evidence. And it's true in a bipartisan sense because people on both sides ran focus groups and told us about them. Trump's flirtations with smashing limits on presidential power, while thrilling to many of his followers, alarm other voters, including some who once supported him. Lori McCammon, a grandmother in Alma, Wisconsin, voted for Trump in 2016, but says she recoiled at his recent comments and won't be supporting him in November. She says she's worried that Trump won't cede power if he's reelected. Based on what I've heard from him and figures like Steve Bannon, McCammon says, this would be our last free and fair election. Hey, Miss McCammon, why didn't you vote for Trump in 2020? And hey, Joshua Green, if she didn't vote for Trump in 2020, why are you acting like this is representative of former Trump supporters? What even is a former Trump supporter? Someone who hated Hillary and did it as a protest vote? Strategists and pollsters say that, much like McCammon, many Uncommitted voters don't perceive Trump's language to be jesting or ironic, nor do they view a potential power grab as a joke. When we ask about his record on democracy, there's a lot of general concern, even among Republicans, about what a second Trump term might be like, says Brian Bennett, a pollster with Navigator Research, a Democrat-aligned firm. Unease among non-Democrat voters is also evident in public surveys. A recent Quinnipiac University poll found that 21% of independents and 8% of Republicans indicated that, quote, preserving democracy in the United States, end quote, was the most critical issue facing the country. And what a strange question to ask. If I was ever asked that question, I would immediately answer, what do you mean by democracy? Our system isn't a democracy. It wasn't intended to be. But are you using the word democracy as a euphemism for our constitutional republic? Because if you are, and you're worried about the threat to that from rigged and stolen elections, then I would actually agree with you that resolving that issue may well be the most important issue. But if you mean that we're going to preserve the farce that is our federal government, or the unelected administrative state, our standing with NATO, our acquiescence to various controls by the global regime, well, no. It's not an issue at all to preserve that. In fact, what I want is for that thing to be destroyed. That's why we support Donald Trump. It's because we want to be a sovereign nation of sovereign individuals, and we want a constitutional republic, not our democracy. But hey, if to you democracy is just a euphemism, then all good. I can get on board with that. The fear that Trump might do something unprecedented to undermine democracy is a new variable in an otherwise familiar race between two unpopular candidates who've faced off before. Several political professionals who talk to voters for a living say they've detected a fundamental shift in the way people view Trump's motivations and intentions as compared with other politicians. It certainly is amazing what total propagandistic control over virtually all political communications and the censorship of the political opposition can achieve in regard to the general public's view of a certain politician. Now, Joshua Green and people similarly child-brained are too far behind on an informational timeline to understand that Donald Trump actually isn't unpopular anymore. It worked for a while. It doesn't work anymore. And it's not looking great for the future either. Another ridiculous narrative. They are both unpopular. No, Joe Biden is unpopular. He is unpopular despite a media that has supported everything he does and the agenda that he promotes. Despite propaganda and censorship and blatant lies about who Joe Biden is and what he represents in his favor always, he is still unpopular. But back to Joshua Green and Bloomberg. Typically, when we raise concerns about a candidate's agenda, people are skeptical and want to do their own research first or think it's an attack, says Carpenter, the focus group director. With Trump, that's not true. Voters believe that he would try to remove term limits, and they're nervous about what's possible. So they found voters who don't want to do their research first when the person conducting the focus group asks them an outlandish question. Strange. It's crazy that all these people are always wrong about absolutely everything, making continually horrific decisions in the process. They're nervous about what's possible. Carpenter's conversations with uncommitted voters have led him to believe that beyond January 6th and Trump's inflammatory comments, this shift owes a great deal to a less obvious catalyst: the Supreme Court. Its 2022 decision overturning Roe v. Wade and eliminating women's constitutional right to an abortion. Mythology. There was never a constitutional right to abortion. It's preposterous. But let's continue. Has caused voters to wonder what else that they take for granted might be changed or removed. The dimensions of what constitutes a credible threat have expanded because of Roe, Carpenter says. Since that decision, you hear voters talking themselves out of the notion that an idea is too far-fetched. It's funny that these people get paid to ask groups of people who don't know anything and don't have real opinions, which is the only way you could actually be a non-committed voter these days. But they ask these people leading questions that they then agree with, and these people believe them. It would be one thing to get paid to do a focus group and then deliver the results favorable to the organization that's paying you. That's very common. A year or so ago, I did an episode on an article from the outlet The Hollywood Reporter about how Amazon Studios was blowing tons of money trying to acquire talent and intellectual property and then making content that absolutely nobody wanted. One of the things they used to do was hire these focus groups to tell them what was wrong with their content. The focus groups would say, we don't want the LGBTQ stuff. We don't want all the racial weirdness. We don't want any of this political nonsense. We just want good shows. And within the company, they would decide that the focus groups were wrong and racist and bigoted, and then get different focus groups to give them the answers they wanted so that they could keep justifying the terrible business decisions they were making. It's very much the same with politics. Now, if you're a person who conducts focus groups, you own a company that conducts focus groups, you would, of course, know that. And you might lie about it to reporters so clueless that they spend their time on the Blue Sky app, but you'd never actually believe it yourself. But it seems like that's exactly what this Carpenter guy has done. He says the dimensions of what constitutes a credible threat have expanded because of Roe. Since that decision, you hear voters talking themselves out of the notion that an idea is too far-fetched. That is so elaborate. The overturning of Roe versus Wade is the shocker. That's the thing that convinces people that no idea is too far-fetched. The overturning of Roe v. Wade did that. It wasn't people seeing their neighbors wear masks that don't work in their cars. It wasn't people posting pictures of themselves wearing those masks while getting injected with toxic experimental gene therapies that couldn't protect them from diseases that couldn't kill them. It wasn't everyone pretending that Joe Biden received the most votes of any candidate in history by far, winning only after Election Day, never being able to draw more than like 20 Jeeps to a rally. No, it was none of that. Voters just keep approaching this Carpenter guy and letting him know that the overturning of Roe v. Wade that everyone knew was coming and many people understood to be a poorly argued decision to begin with, that was what changed everything. This is the sort of framing you would have to generate, then ask of someone in a leading way. You got to do that on 3 different questions and then mash them all together to get this understanding of how people operate. I don't even know if the television and censorship could get people to actually express that convoluted nonsense. Roe versus Wade got overturned? Well, then, yeah, I'm sure that I could see Trump becoming a monarch and choosing to rule forever. These people are insane. And that's not a euphemism. I genuinely believe that these people are insane. They are suffering from a total inversion within the false reality. Everything in their lives is inverted. But let's continue. With Biden trailing Trump in most recent surveys, including in 6 of 7 battleground states in the latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll, Democrats are eager to find and exploit any potential Trump weakness. Amplifying fears of a power grab is one possibility. Okay, well, now we're getting down to it. The uniparty left wants this narrative to stick, so they're pushing this narrative out there and hoping that it catches on. They're going to claim that it's already caught on so that people feel like if they adopt that belief, they will already have people on their side. They'll say things like, yeah, man, I didn't believe it at first, but do you hear these things that Trump keeps saying and then the media reframes and distorts the meaning of? Well, that's convinced me. That and Roe v. Wade have convinced me that Trump is going to become a monarch and rule forever. And of course, I don't really mean that. That's just a euphemism. Same way I say that Trump is going to be a dictator. He says just for one day and then laughs and everybody else laughs and they all say it's a joke. But we know it's not a joke. Joke is just a euphemism. Recently, the liberal group Priorities USA asked 1,500 likely voters across 8 battleground states to rank more than 24 Trump statements or policies from most to least concerning. In results not publicly released until now, Priorities found that Trump's dictator comment and calls to gut the Constitution ranked as the most concerning of all the options. Ultimately, we expect this race to come down to the clear choice that voters face on abortion, the economy, and protecting democracy, says Nick Ahmed, executive director of Priorities USA. Trump's promise of dictatorship will shape every one of these if he's elected. Many Republican strategists agree. That's kind of the bet that the Biden campaign is making, says an unaffiliated Republican pollster who asked not to be identified because he didn't want to anger the Trump campaign. That eventually people are going to become so frightened about what the next Trump term will mean that they'll move over to Biden. So they have a liberal focus group, 2 liberal pollsters, an editor from the Bulwark who runs a focus group, and then a Republican pollster, quote unquote, who is so Republican and so honest that he won't even state his name because he understands it would mean that he would never be trusted or work ever again. And for good reason, not that Joshua Green could possibly understand. He is, however, right about the bet Democrats are making on this narrative strategy. They do seem to think that this is their best bet, at least insofar as they are actually trying to win. But of course, they're not. They already have Joe Biden walking the plank. What they're trying to do is set a narrative basis to convince enough of the country to believe that despite the fact that everyone chose Trump over Biden, all those people voting for politicians that no one ever talks about, what they voted for was divided government. We're just going to make sure to convince everyone that this election is only about Trump. And when we tell them that the uniparty won down ballot, they're not going to fight us because we gave the election deniers Donald Trump and we gave him Larry Hogan. And that's all that matters. That is what they need the American public to believe. The strategy is aimed at that goal, not getting Joe Biden to win a rigged election. And that's not to say they won't try to diminish Trump to the point where maybe they could convince the country that Trump lost again in a legitimate election. But come on, they could probably stage a nuclear event on American soil at this point and not get everyone back on the same page enough to accept that. Though in that situation, that is when you look to what's happening in Ukraine right now, where Volodymyr Zelensky's term as puppet president has expired, but Ukraine remains under martial law to the extent it's a real country. And so they don't have to have elections. He banned the opposition political party. There's no election coming, and he's still a very legitimate president. I'm not saying they wouldn't try to pull anything like that off. And in that case, they would need Trump diminished as much as possible. But the idea that the strategy from the top down is centered on convincing Americans that Joe Biden could actually win a legitimate election, that's not the priority. The priority is putting people in place down ballot to subvert the Trump presidency and convincing America that nothing is wrong with the elections. They are going to promote these issues to tell the American people that they voted for divided government as a check on Donald Trump's power, and they were moderate about abortion. After months of playing coy, Trump told Time in April that he would serve only 2 terms. But this hasn't placated opponents such as Ahmed, who point to organized efforts by the Heritage Foundation and other Trump-friendly venues to radically expand presidential powers. The American Conservative magazine published an article in March that argued for repeal of the 22nd Amendment, which it blasted as, quote, an arbitrary restraint on presidents who serve non-consecutive terms and on democracy itself. And they are exactly right about that. We don't have to go into that here, but term limits are not the solution people pretend them to be. If we had legitimate elections, they wouldn't be an issue at all. The only reason it's been made an issue is because old, incompetent, ineffective politicians continue to rake in money and win elections by wide margins without even the potential for a substantial challenge to their power. The man from Priorities USA, by the way, is scared of Project 2025. And when he says Trump plans to radically expand presidential power, he means by firing and removing the unelected administrative state. He's not doing that for the purposes of expanding presidential power. He's doing that for the purpose of removing the illegitimate powers that all of these unelected bureaucrats actually possess under this total distortion of the constitutional republic we were told was our birthright. The idea of repeal has a lengthy lineage. Ratified in 1951, the 22nd Amendment was largely a response to the unprecedented 4 terms served by Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which raised concerns about the potential for long-serving presidents to accumulate too much power and potentially undermine democratic principles. It's amazing that they're not more concerned about illegitimate and unelected presidents just openly defying the Constitution and leading us into awful foreign wars. Am I talking about Joe Biden or FDR? It's hard to tell, isn't it? The amendment has subsequently irked popular presidents and their supporters in both parties. In 1987, Ronald Reagan told television interviewer David Frost that he, quote, would like to start a movement, end quote, to repeal the amendment, which he claimed interfered with people's right to, quote, vote for someone as often as they want to do, end quote. And people should be able to do that. Democratic House members introduced legislation to repeal the 22nd Amendment during Bill Clinton's presidency and again during Barack Obama's. Neither bill went anywhere. And you see, because the bills didn't go anywhere, that's almost the same as them never attempting to do that. And if you accept that they never actually attempted to do that because the bills never went anywhere, then you will understand that what Donald Trump is doing is unprecedented, as Joshua Green just said. Altering the Constitution would be extraordinarily difficult, requiring either a 2/3 majority vote in the House and Senate or a constitutional convention called by 2/3 of state legislatures, after which any amendment would need to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Even Trump's most ardent backers don't view such a scenario as realistic. They suggest that talk of repeal is aimed mainly at upsetting the former president's critics. It's 100% about trolling liberals, Bannon says. It's too much of a heavy lift to get states to ratify repeal. Not that certain parts of the MAGA universe wouldn't love it if we did. Still, the possibility that Trump might try to abolish term limits if reelected in November registers as a serious threat to a meaningful share of voters, despite his claim to the contrary. And it appears to be driving them toward Biden. In an April 21st NBC News Public Opinion Strategies poll, 16% of registered voters named threats to democracy as the most important issue facing the country. Among those people who think that threats to democracy are the most important issue, Biden held a 67-point lead over Trump, 81-14. So you see that? According to a fake news poll, people who, after watching fake news, have come to believe that preserving democracy is the most important thing in the entire world, which is why they don't want any review of elections, and they want to make sure that absolutely anyone can vote in any time or manner or place that they choose. Those people who could only be convinced of such preposterous ideas after succumbing to the effects of a 9-year-long hate movement, those people who believe all this stuff only because they hate Donald Trump as much as anyone possibly could, those 12 retards prefer Joe Biden by 67 points. McCammon, the Wisconsin woman who once voted for Trump, now counts herself as part of this group. I will vote for Biden even if he is in a coma, she says. Ah, yes, a low information voter voting for a fake president on the verge of death who legitimately needs dead voters to get elected, that's the sort of thing you have to do to preserve democracy, at least as a euphemism. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's